You have two kind of teachers.
Yeah.
My son is in the class right now where across the board at his school, when it comes to having your school stuff ready, you got to have your backpack, you got to have your laptop charged, fully charged. You got to have your pen and your paper and all this kind of stuff, right? And so every kid starts with 100. And you lose 5 points every time you show up to that class and you're not prepared, your laptop's not fully charged, whatever. -5 deduction, now you're at a 95, right? You start with 100. That's actually the way that I live and work. So everybody with me has immediate street cred. Like nobody starts at zero. My boss, he's more of a start at zero kind of a person.
Yeah.
You got to work your way up. Welcome. You are listening to Season 2 of the Bonafide Leaders Podcast, a podcast that exists to inspire legitimate and authentic leadership in the workplace and beyond, and I'm your host, Tim G. Williams. Now, here in Season 2, our theme is Making the Leap. You may call it leveling up, uncharted territory, or expanding your reach. It's those times in our life and our careers when we take on a new challenge. You'll discover how you can successfully navigate your own huge leaps as you hear stories from me and others. This season, I'm excited to be interviewing some exceptional leaders from a variety of fields who'll share some of the big leaps they've made. You'll get a glimpse into what's enabled both their professional and personal success. Now, a quick housekeeping note. If you're finding this podcast useful, remember to subscribe and be sure to leave a rating or review. All right, welcome back to this continuation of Season 2, this podcast theme around making the leap. And I'm really excited once again to continue a conversation that we started back in episode 1 with my friend. And so we're going to kind of end off, or I guess begin today's conversation where we ended off last time. So let's get to it.
All right. So yeah, when we talked last time,
Yeah.
you had just gotten this call and you're moving into a role we are learning all about, which was the head of financial planning and analysis. And I need to make sure I get that correct because those are a lot of very important words that I need to put together correctly. But so you're moving into this role, and I'm curious, you talked about some of the lessons you were learning along the way about I know you talked about meetings and just understanding. I thought the perception side of things, how perception was so important moving into this new role quickly. So now we're going to continue, like you've been in the role for a while. So what were some of the key learnings, the successes that you had, the challenges as you were more seasoned in this role that you were overcoming?
Yeah. So made the leap, and I'd call it a successful leap. Biggest pieces that I got out of that role were 1, financial acumen, business acumen. I finally got a taste of utilizing the skills that I got from school.
Yeah.
Net present value and debt to equity ratios, things that you learn in a finance course. This was a pure corporate finance job. And I didn't even necessarily know that stuff existed inside the company until I got to that role. And that was great. The other thing that I got from the role is more comfort in front of bigger audiences. I had to give tons and tons of presentations. And so I got more comfortable with that. The other thing I got from it was being able to succinctly distill down critical messages, kind of coming from both sides, sometimes from the tops down, sometimes coming from the bottoms up, and being able to do that quickly because most of the people that I was servicing, they just didn't have a lot of time. So that was something where if I was more verbose early, now I had to put into practice being more succinct. So that was another big thing. Other than that, I think the biggest piece was understanding how top management thinks. And that's something that you can really only get when you're in the room. And I can just think of countless numbers of small rooms like this that we're in right now, where it's just me, the CEO, CFO, the corporate controller, sometimes there, sometimes not, maybe the head of manufacturing, and we're trying to figure something out, doing some analysis, trying to project forward, what we think is going to be the best outcome for the company. And, whiteboarding and listening to them and hearing how they're thinking about how they might solve problems. That was huge. And that was something that I knew I was going to be able to take with me no matter where I went. And that may have been the biggest single, most important thing that I got from the role in making that leap.
Wow. It's interesting. It's like the little things that make the difference.
Yes.
So talk about some challenges though, too, because I'm assuming it wasn't super easy.
Yeah. The thing that was challenging is that every quarter there was something new.
Mm.
So in the very first quarter that I got in that job, about that time, we had announced that we were going to be acquiring this company called National Semiconductor. And National at the time was a pretty big company. And this was the biggest acquisition in the history of the semiconductor industry at the time. So $6.5 billion, which was half of TI's revenue. I mean, that's just a ginormous amount of money to pay. So when you do an acquisition like that, you've got all sorts of financial ramifications. There's intangibles and customer relationships and patents and tax implications. And you got to sort of keep those on the balance sheet, cash flow statement, et cetera, for a number of years. And those actually ran out from 2011, 2012, all the way through 2019. But
Wow.
the dollar amounts were changing every quarter, and we had to report that out to the Wall Street every time we had an earnings release. So that was changing. Second thing that was changing is we were also in the middle of shutting down our largest revenue making division, which doesn't seem like that would be something you want to go do. Why would you shut down wireless? And that was a natural question for a lot of our customers, a lot of our employees at the time, but we did that. We made that announcement to wind down the wireless division, and to wind down $3 billion of business is a big deal. And then to figure out, okay, are we going to create another segment to replace that? And what segment would that be? And so about that time, we started to create the thing called the embedded processing segment to more or less replace wireless and some other parts of the portfolio. That also required a huge amount of energy in terms
Mm.
of reorganizing, creating new financial documents, putting new leaders in different roles, severance. There's all kinds of ramifications when you do that. And then at the same time, we were going through shutting down our older factories. So we had 4 factories that were much less efficient, wafer fabs. And so I was right in the middle of that. Of course, you've got to report those numbers out to Wall Street, and those numbers change sometimes, right? You got to see what the actual benefit is on a quarterly basis for some period of time. So what was happening is that every quarter there was something changing. The other big challenge, I went back and looked. My original organization had about 10 people, and we more or less maintained 10 people, but we transitioned about 25 different people over that 3-year period that I was in the role. And part of that is intentional. This group, this shop, what someone used to tell me, a senior executive in the company, is that you ought to think of your group as the ninjas of finance. You are the finance ninjas, right? And, we need people to come into these roles because they can take back what they learn here and bring it back to other parts of the company, which is a really useful thing. But for the leader of that team, that means you got to retrain new people continuously. Every month, roughly, there was a change. And when you're talking about processes in which, and I talked about this the first episode, when you can't make mistakes,
Yeah.
that's a lot. That's a big deal to get people to understand the processes, the rigor. We were on a really old mainframe kind of database system, right, which handled all of our numbers, which didn't really tie to SAP at the time. I mean, it was a lot of work to get everybody trained up and ready to go, and still keep things transparent for senior leadership so they didn't feel the pain that we were going through of continuously training new people. So for sure, there were an equal amount of challenges as there were successes. However, at the end of the day, main thing is get the numbers right. And we got the numbers right way more often than we didn't. And I think we were able to bring in some new processes and manage a ton of chaos. Oh, I didn't even mention a capital management strategy, which we were the first in our industry to roll
Wow.
out. Anyway, there's a bunch of things that were happening, and I felt like we were able to manage it well, and got through that leap.
So you get the lay of the land.
Yeah.
Now it's time to leap again. You can't be satisfied. You gotta go.
Yeah.
So you get a call.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on as you're like where you are in the current position and what's happening, and then you get this call.
Yeah. What was different about this one is that, remember the last time I was like a year and a half in, and I was like, huh? Right? Because it's supposed to be like 3 years or so
Right.
in this role. This time, I had been in the role about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And I would say I was at this point pretty proficient and comfortable in my role. And so about that time, you hope that something might open up. You
Mhm.
don't know what will open up, but if you've done well, you know what's coming your way, which
Yeah.
is the opportunity to be the head of finance and operations for one of our big divisions, basically, is what I like to call it. So I got a call the very tail end of let me see, that would have been 2013. And they were just whispers, kind of checking in, kind of feeling me out. There was nothing that was definite, but it was clear that there could be an opportunity that might be opening it up. So my mindset was, I'm excited, just like I was last time. Although last time it was like, whoa, this doesn't make sense. This time it made sense. And the unfortunate part is that I don't think I fully understood what I was getting myself into.
Yeah.
So I got the call. And then, over the next couple of months, we work out some things internally, have conversations with my family. And it looks like, okay, we're a go for this. But this was the most dynamic leap I've ever had by far. Very dynamic in terms of what was being presented to me versus the last role, which was more of a technical, really, really uphill kind of a steep, but it's technical. It's all stuff that I just got to learn from a finance and business acumen perspective. This next one, yeah, this is like scope overwhelm.
Okay, so talk about what is all happening. You talked about a couple family conversations, some corporate conversations.
Yeah.
You get the first kind of inklings this may happen to talk about that timeline and what's happening to the initial call to you're fully announced and in the role.
All right. So behind the scenes, there's a whole lot of mixing of a cake. I mean, there's a lot of ingredients that have to come together. So what I didn't know at the time and what they couldn't tell me, and I didn't find this out until literally right before it was the end of May by the time this
Mhm.
announcement was made. First contact was the end, probably 6 to 8 months before that. What was going to happen is that our CIO was going to be retiring. And the person who was at the time leading the integration of National Semiconductor, that company I
Yeah.
talked about before, they were going to be moving back to Dallas to take on the CIO role. So I was going to be going out to California to backfill actually my mentor, my former boss, and someone who I thought the world of. And I knew that I'd be able to get probably more support in this transition than I may have gotten in the last transition because we had a good relationship to
Yeah.
start with. What was happening is I had to take a very covert, what do you call it, house hunting trip. So that was one of the things that happened. The other thing that was
So let me
happening,
pause you. You have to move your whole family out to California.
correct.
Okay. Okay.
And when you say you have to, this is where my wife would kind of get in here if she were in the room right now. The situation was presented to me as if, hey, look, these people need somebody on the ground. The person who did this job before you, they were on the ground. The person who led the integration as our general manager, they were more or less on the ground, or at least present, frequently. So to do the job, we think the way you're going to need to do it, you need to be there. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense to me. At the time, I was told, travel would look like this. And so, I said, yeah, it makes sense. So anyway, we do this house hunting trip. We do this negotiation over a relocation package. I got to realizing that, oh, okay, California, like, oh, y'all are for real. Like the cost of living is like no joke, no joke. So it was basically about 2.5 times the cost from a house standpoint. And it'd be, I don't know, another 2 times from an apartment renting perspective if you wanted to be anywhere near where the office was. The office was going to be in Santa Clara, California, so right in the heart of Silicon Valley. What else was happening? So with this relocation, we were not going to have any friends or family that we knew. It was going to be a whole new school situation. We were just talking about school and the
Yeah.
challenges, right, with school. And it's culture shock because, and again, I didn't understand this, but I'm moving from Texas to Silicon Valley. Very, very different. Now, since then, we've had a lot of people move from the Bay and other parts of California here to Dallas, but at the time, is a big deal. Secondly, what else made this dynamic? It was the first time I had not been in headquarters. And again, I had no appreciation for the difference between a headquarters job versus being at a remote site. I wasn't into the politics. I didn't even know that that was a thing. Showed up,
Interesting.
and that's a whole nother thing. Travel? Yeah. So in my financial planning and analysis job, I might travel 3 times a year. So in a 4-month span, I might travel once. Between the time this was announced in May and September, I made 9 trips. So travel was going to be a whole nother thing.
So they made you move out there, but then travel all over. Just want to make sure I'm understanding that
You
correctly.
are
Okay.
understanding that
Okay.
very correctly. And where did I travel?
Don't tell me to
To
Texas.
Dallas. You got it. You got it. 8 out of those 9 trips were right here back to Dallas. 1 trip to Malaysia. What else? So I had a new boss.
Yeah.
I'm now in a matrix situation. So before I just had a more or less just reporting to the finance structure. I had the corporate controller was my direct supervisor. The CFO was more or less my supervisor as well. And now in this new role, I have the corporate controller remains, but now I pick up a general manager, the senior VP who runs the business, and I help partner with them. So that's now a matrix situation because you're trying to keep both people happy, and that's always fun. On top of that, I have a brand new team and people who I really don't even know. Brand new team and org. Oh, and by the way, the size of the org, remember I told you I had about a 10-person organization? Now I'm going to a 70-person organization that I'm functionally responsible for executing all the operations, all the order fulfillment, all the financial planning, the accounting, the compliance. Oh, and by the way, I'm finding out that there's this whole post-acquisition integration thing that's not complete. People think on the outside that, oh, you acquire a company 2 years later, 2.5 years later, certainly you're done with all that. No. Again, I encourage people to listen to go back and read a really, really cool book. It's called Chip War. Chip War, right? Semiconductors. Another name is Chip War. And this book gives the history of semiconductors, which is a fascinating industry. And National Semiconductor, the company that TI had acquired, is one of the storied, legendary,
Okay.
original founding semiconductor companies based right there in the Bay Area. And so this is a proud group of employees. And there's process changes and systems changes and mindset changes and how we operate changes that take significant time because that stuff is baked into your culture. All that stuff I was coming into. So when I say it was the most dynamic job change that I've ever had, easily, because you're talking about a physical relocation, a change in boss, a matrix boss situation, a brand new team, none of which I had ever worked with before, my direct reports, and then a whole organization multiplied by 7 from what I previously had. Oh, the last thing I'd say is that I've got my job responsibilities, which is to plan strategy and execute finance, accounting, and operations. But now I actually have site responsibilities. What do you mean when you say site responsibilities? Well, when you're at headquarters, there's a whole global facilities team who manages trash and security and stuff like that. Now in this role, because it's a remote site, there's, I don't know, 1,200 people or so that's there. This was the national headquarters site. That's a now a major part of my responsibility that I've never thought about before.
Wow.
So when you talk about badge readers, when you talk about security, who can get in and out of the building, who are our neighbors to the left and to the right and across the street? Is this an Apple? That's a whole nother situation. I'll tell you about
And
that.
you were in charge of all that?
I was not solely
Oh,
responsible. It was technically I was basically the backup site leader.
yeah.
So our general
Wow.
manager was the site leader. I'm pretty much the right hand to him. He's traveling a bunch. So I'm walking the building, koi pond and koi fish. There's all these parcels of land. There's workout facilities. There's the ladies' workout facilities and the men's workout facilities, and always issues and dramas with that. All that now is also on my plate. Upgrades to facilities, lights, things I never had to deal with. That's now a part of this job responsibility. So very, very dynamic.
So I'm curious what they were doing to put them at ease and ensure that you were right for this role. So from that, "Hey, we think we want you. This is opening," to, "Yes, you're the person." Like, what are they doing with you to make sure that they feel you're ready?
Let me give you some insider baseball that happens from time to time. What I believe happened,
Yeah.
this was kind of confirmed later on, is that they had sort of informally checked with other experienced controllers, people who are already heads of finance and
Okay.
operations like me. And I don't know that anybody else said, yeah, I'll do that. So who's left? It's me. So I think from a company perspective, you actually would prefer to have someone more senior than me, right? This is my first head of finance and operations for one of these big divisions. You wouldn't want that ordinarily. You'd rather have someone with the experience to go do that job. But unfortunately, that's who they had, was me.
Okay, so that makes this really interesting. So talking about, like, obviously this is a huge leap.
Yeah.
Somebody typically with more experience would be doing this. You're going.
Yeah.
You talked about just how it's less tactical. You have a lot more just strategy, like running a company versus doing the numbers to make the company run, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So what else is happening that this is I mean, there's a lot of things happening that this is making this a huge leap, but
Yeah.
anything else that's taking this from and talk about making that leap because this has gotta be really hard for you too in taking that to a whole new level, like,
Mhm.
it's I mean, I can see why this is a new leap, I just wanna know what's going on in your brain
Yeah.
in getting there.
I think leading up until, the announcement, I was fine. Now there's a lot to do, right? You gotta try to get your house sold, put it on the market. By the way, we had to do a whole secret process with that. Even with our realtor, we had to keep it absolutely, a cone of silence. Like, everything was so secretive because you're talking about the chief information officer of the company that's retiring. That doesn't need to get out. There's all sorts of bad actors in the world who wanna cause harm and problems, and when you're in transition, that's an obvious open weak spot, if you will. So, for good reason, we had to keep things pretty tight. That being said, it was a lot to manage from a personal perspective, also going back and forth doing the house hunting trip, but also, once our house there, right, was now negotiated, which was a whole nother thing. We actually bought that house sight unseen, which is
Oof,
crazy. Oh, and it was 2.5 times what what we had paid for the house that we
and
were
probably
leaving.
half the size too.
But you had to,
Yeah.
because then yeah, it was
Yeah.
yeah, about half the size. You're right. And the walls are much thinner. I mean, there's a whole thing with that. I'm gonna try not to talk about that kind of stuff. But I think what was going through my mind is it's a big change, but I know I've got this person who I'm replacing, and we had started to have some meetings. So we probably had a good 3 or 4 conversations that were at least an hour, where she had a spreadsheet and we just kind of went through one item at a time. And of course, I had my long list of questions. So I was feeling more and more comfortable. However, it's when you actually walk into, and I'll tell you, I guess, that moment for me. So what happened for me is it's May 28th, I'm not mistaken, 2014. And what my predecessor and I agree on is that she should introduce me to this new organization on site there in Santa Clara, and then I would come in right behind her, and then she would leave the room so that they could hear from me directly. And this was the first time I'm ever doing one of those presidential
Yeah.
addresses, if you will, right? So, what I had told myself is that I'm just gonna be authentic. I'm gonna be me. And she had given me some ideas on maybe what I could put together on a PowerPoint slide and kept it really, really brief. I mainly just talked. But the thing that happened is that she opened the door and you could feel when there's a lot of people in the room because it's warm, right? You feel that heat and
Mhm.
that air that comes of, whoa, it's a lot of people. And then I just start looking around and you see all the faces and you're like, dang, I for real don't know anybody up in here, right? And you feel like an outsider, but yet this is now my organization. The announcement has just gone out. I'm walking inside and, she says a few words and then she leaves. And it's just me.
Oof.
And what was good about that is while I was nervous, I felt good about the fact that I was true to who I am, not wanting to be a replacement basically for this. I just call it. She was beloved.
Yeah.
Tons of experience. She had been a head of finance and operations for a whole nother business in Dallas before she went out to do the integration and become the head of finance and operations for this business in California. Grown and gone kids, right? So she's in a different place. Very, very fun. Part of the reason why, we still are in touch today. But if I tried to be her, that wasn't going to be authentic to me. And I think the team would know that. So I was proud of the fact that in that room, despite being nervous, I kind of laid the groundwork for what you can expect of me and what I expect of you. And it was just transparent, not firm, not rigid, I should say, but firm. And at the same time, I think relatable. I
Mhm.
think it was a shock because there's a lot of reasons it was a shock. I'll just say this too. There were very few black people on that site. I want to say less than 10, right? Out of the 1,000 or 1,200 people who worked at that site in California, there may have been 10
Wow.
black people. And none that I can think of. I'm trying to think, were there any who I know were like senior managers? I can't think of any. So it was just me. And I doubt they'd ever had anybody before me.
Yeah.
So you got that going on. You got this newness going on. You got the fact that, they don't know me. You got the fact that I'm replacing a legend. And that's when it kinda hit me, wow, this is a lot because there's just so many people in the room and you feel all that warm air when you're in there and it's like, "This is mine now."
Oof. And I'm guessing, you can tell me I'm wrong, but I'm guessing it wasn't, like, all laid out, super easy. You get into the role. Once you figure out, "Okay, I've got some stuff to do," I'm gonna guess there's some challenges
Yeah,
that you're getting head on.
yeah.
Can you talk about some of those? I mean, you've talked a little bit about just these perceptions and
Yes.
all these things you have to overcome. You're not
Yes.
experienced as you should be, right? Or expected to be. All these, ethnicity, all these things.
Yeah.
So you've got those challenges, and I'm assuming the job itself had its own challenges.
Yes. Yeah, and there were no black people in the room either. I don't think. I mean, there may have been one, right? So it's a whole lot going on in my mind. I'm realizing this is going to be for real, very, very different than what I've had before. So let's talk about the job challenges. One of them still is a little bit of a perception challenge because the person I was replacing was already beloved. Now, when the announcement went out that she was going to be the chief information officer, I think it only increased the level of respect, and it should be, right, for someone like that. But now that just put even more pressure. And I didn't understand or
Mhm.
appreciate that at the time. I really was so laser focused on just being the best Tim that I could that I didn't probably allow enough, I don't know what you would call it, but just accounting for that, following a
Yeah.
legend. What's that like? Another thing is I realized, man, the scope of this role is absolutely unending. Unending. Customers. Oh, and by the way, Apple is based right there. And they're one of our biggest customers. And National, as a company, had sort of disappointed Apple with some of their
Ooh.
products.
And you got to walk into that?
TI, well, yeah, well, TI had a good situation going with Apple, where business was growing and growing, more sockets, and National was kind of going through a tough spot. And it just so happened that the person I was replacing, they were the executive sponsor for Apple. So there were some decisions that had to be made. Gosh, am I gonna have to pick that up too, on top of everything else I got going on? There were other customers for which she was an executive sponsor or someone she was close to. So those were some of the decisions that we had to kind of make. But when you talk about a site that you're responsible for, there's things like earthquake preparedness. Here in Dallas, we don't think about earthquakes. There, you do. You're right there on the San Andreas fault line. And you never know when the big one's going to come. And when you talk about evacuation preparedness, when we used to do the evacuation preparedness stuff in Dallas, I mean, yeah, you go out the building, okay, go,
Yeah.
this is your spot. Now, like, I'm leading that stuff and it's real. And what happens if a reporter shows up because there's groundwater issues? California is a very environmentally friendly place. And there's all these kinds of regulations, right? So there's that. Plus just the day job, things like post-acquisition integration meetings. There are so many systems that we are not using because we're former national people that we need to be using because they're native TI systems that are slowing us down, or it's causing us not to be integrated. And we're trying to integrate, right? The two companies from two to becoming one. The way that National had operated from it was more of a silo. They had finance and accounting people that were sort of together. Then operations was like its own thing. TI integrated finance and operations. So there's building that culture. Then within the first 60 days, I lost two people. Nobody on my direct staff, but these were both individual contributors. You might say, not a big deal, right? You got 70 people. What's the problem? Well, for me, it was shock because we didn't have high levels of attrition in Dallas. At the time, right, there weren't JP Morgan Chases here and State Farm and all these companies. Now, obviously, they're here. But before that, Dallas was kind of a place where Texas Instruments was kind of a premier place to work.
You stayed
And
there.
yeah, you kind of stick and you stay. They treat you well. Your benefits are good. If you work hard, you have opportunity. They promote internally. It's a great place. Out there, within the first 60 days, I lost, I would say, a very moderate performing individual. They got a promotion to Facebook. And then another person who was a top performer, she's gone to Google. That I think was critical because I
Mhm.
realized, oh my God, my competition isn't just semiconductor companies, which it was. There's a ton of semiconductor companies right there in the Bay, but it's Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Nvidia, all these companies that are literally just less than a mile, 2 miles away from where I work. So you got that. You got the geography thing. Let me talk about this challenge, which may seem like it's nothing, but it's a really, really big deal. And my general manager, my boss, had kind of told me this was going to be a nuisance. And he was, I would say he understated the geography thing. So when you work in headquarters, things flow out of headquarters. And keep in mind, my most recent job, I was a headquarters dude.
Yeah.
So that was my normal life. I didn't really know anything other than that. I never experienced a remote site, and I'd always been on the Dallas Central Time Zone. I'm now 2 hours behind in California. So you can do the math pretty quickly and realize that meetings that start at 8:30 in Dallas, which was a regular phenomenon, 8 o'clock, 8:30 meetings, sometimes 7:30 meetings. What time do they start in California? And again, both my boss and the person I was replacing, their kids are grown and gone, out of the house, empty nesters. I got these little ones at the house. And it's 6:30 in the morning. I'm trying to get some breakfast, shave, shower, and get these kids to school, what have you. But I got to be on a call too at 6 o'clock and 6:30. So you're juggling that, and there's zero appreciation from Dallas on that. I can't even think about mentioning that, right?
No.
That's so far. That's just deal with it, right? Nobody even comprehends it. But it's not just morning time; it's lunchtime. So if you think about any traditional lunch, you would say, what time would that be? Roughly, maybe 12 to 1. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, 12 to 1, they're doing lunch in Dallas. I'm working, right? It's 10 o'clock where I am. But guess what I want to do from 12 to 1? I like to, get a break, but no, 2 to 3, that's meeting time, busy time. So you're fighting and you're competing just to get a break in your day. It's things like that that were very, very irritating and frustrating. And I would say the last thing is when you're remote, this is before the world of Zoom, and we were using WebEx at the time. WebEx got a lot better, but at the time, man, you're having to mute, and there's all this background noise because you're the only one who's not physically in the room, and people have no appreciation for you being on the phone, being able to just weigh in. Oh my God, that was like so hard to deal with. And you try to speak up, and people just speak over you. They don't acknowledge that you're on the call, even though you're an equal to everybody you're on the phone with. Oh my God. So it's that kind of stuff. Those are like just challenges that were hitting me square on. Hey, listeners, if you're busy, and I know you are, but you want to grow your leadership in an efficient and cost-effective way, I invite you to check out my on-demand digital leadership courses at bonafideleaders.com/courses. Now, you're wondering, what do I get in exchange for my purchase? Well, you'll get dynamic teaching and insights, and you'll leave with the tools and practical application you need to be a more effective and impactful leader. Wherever you lead, at work or at home, you'll become more confident in your capabilities because you'll know your unique leadership style and how to apply it. You will know how to create powerful and engaging meetings and also how to better integrate your work and life. You'll get that and much, much more. Now, if that weren't enough, with your purchase, as my gift to you, you'll also be added to the Digital Bonafide Leaders community, a real community of leaders like you for networking, best practice sharing, and you'll have direct access to me. Go to the website and you'll find a link in the show notes, and you'll get instant access today.
Well, and I'm curious too, like it had to have been hard also. I've been in this situation where your home life has totally been uprooted also.
Yes.
So nothing against your wife, but I'm sure she's lonely. She's frustrated. You're working crazy hours. She's
Yes.
got little kids at home.
Yes.
She's trying to find her way in this new place. And it's not like you guys can do this together because you're off, worrying about your own career, right? So how were those challenges? So you talked a little bit about just trying to get the kids ready, but even
Yeah.
just probably just trying to make the balance at home too had to be extremely difficult.
So it was. The travel was
Yeah.
disruptive. So the travel was really disruptive, even though it was, you might say, quote unquote, predictable, because you knew about every 2 or 3 weeks I would be going somewhere,
Back to Dallas.
often back to Dallas. Oh, and by the way, these were never 1-day trips.
No.
These were frequently not 2-day trips. They were typically three nights, kind of a trips. So you just think about that for a home life. Oh, and by the way, my wife was homeschooling kids. So again, we have no friends, we have no
Mhm.
family, and I'm laser focused on, my whole first 90 days book, right? I got my little book and I want to make sure, I get there and get my early wins. And at the same time, obviously I care about the family deeply. It's just that my time was completely divided. And like I said, the scope of this job, it just seemed like every day there was something new that I could get my hands into. Not that I wanted to get my hands into, but I realized that I was at least partially responsible. So no, when you talk about home life, man, it was very disruptive to the vibe and flow that we had. I had hoped that, okay, we go out here and it'll cause us to have to rely on one another more.
Yeah.
And so that will build a deeper bond. And in some ways, that was true. That was definitely true. In other ways, though, you're mad at the people around you, and particularly my wife, at me
Yeah.
because of the schedule and what was required just to keep my nose above the water. Again, every other controller, every peer of mine had at least 3 years as a controller experience ahead of me. I have 1 month, if you will, starting in the job. Everyone has at least 3 years. Some have 10 years experience, and they don't have to deal with the shenanigans of travel back and forth from Dallas to California. They don't have to deal with site facilities, earthquake preparedness, media readiness, all the things that, we gotta deal with in this role. There's just a huge experience gap that I'm trying to overcome. And like I said, Aaron, I mean, I just didn't know and appreciate at the time how much I was getting myself into.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm getting stressed out just hearing this story. Okay, so how did you start overcoming these?
Few things were important. So one of the things that, again, another perk, I guess you could say, of this job, and I guess it is a perk, but more so for the organization than it is for me. So one of the perks of this role is that you host the finance leadership team. That's the top 4 finance leaders in the company, the treasurer, the CFO, etc. They come out to California every year in the fall, typically, and I'm the host. So we have to put on a nice show to host this crew. Now, the regional controllers, people in Asia and in Germany, they're used to this. They do this, and I think, a lot of in Japan, they're typically out there, the FLT, for like a week. For mine, it's just a couple days visit, but it's a big deal to prepare for. I'd never prepared for hosting the FLT before. So I wanted to make sure that this was successful. I had heard how well my predecessor had done it. And again, she's great at that kind of a thing. So I really wanted to make sure that they had a good experience. So it starts with the simple things like picking them up from the airport on time, making sure you got the right airport. In the Bay Area, you've got 3, Oakland, SFO, and SJC. So you got to make sure all this stuff is squared away. Logistics, when they come on the building, this national site, it's a big site because this was their headquarters. Now it's Texas Instruments owned, but it's a big site. There's parks, there's fish, there's outdoor walking area. I mean, it's a big site. So making sure they enter, are they coming to building E or they come into the headquarters building? Because there's 2 sides to enter. I mean, it's little things like this that you guys got to make sure is tight. And then the dinner. Where are we going to be going for dinner? Is this something where they have an allergy? Do they have accommodations for people with allergies? Anyway, it's all of this kinds of stuff. Oh, and then by the way, there's the real meat of the business meetings. So when they come, they want to get, reviews, charts, data analysis, presentations on how's the business running. They want to hear from all functions, accounting, finance, operations. I got to go and kind of review some of those and ask my direct reports to review those to make sure they're going to meet the mark. Keep in mind, in that last role, I got a really good chance to understand the view of top management, what they want to hear, and how it's going to make them feel when they hear things a certain way. So I know what they want. Let's make sure we give them what they want. We're not going to lie, cheat, steal, chain, nothing. No, but we're going to make sure that our stuff is tight. So fortunately, I got very good feedback on that experience. And I found out that one of the other things that they were doing from time to time was they were kind of scoping out, right, employees. They were doing skip level visits and conversations to see how is this guy Tim doing. And so that was in September. So that was like right in the 90-day window. And it went really well. So that was one of the first moments, I think, that helped me develop, at least in Dallas, a little bit what I call street cred,
Mhm.
where I no longer had to feel the burden of being micromanaged by Dallas. They got to feel that at least he's got his arms around the organization and his team. They had no idea all the internal stress that I was dealing with and the personal stuff I was dealing with. But from what they could tell, I've got a handle on the site. I know people's names. People seem to respect this guy. Things are get off to a good start. That was one thing that was a big deal.
How did you approach learning this new role? I mean, you've got I mean, planning an event for people. I mean, there's so much that you're doing that's just not in the day-to-day realm you've ever
No,
so,
no.
it sounds like you had a good relationship with the previous person who I'm sure
Yes.
mentored somewhat, but she's also in a
No,
brand new
I mean, that
role.
was short. I mean,
Okay.
once the
Okay.
announcement came out, she was gone. That's why it was important for me to get 3 or 4 solid meetings of her
Yeah.
time before that, because even though good intentions, right? But,
She's off doing her new thing,
that's
right?
right.
So, how did you approach, like, getting your hands around this whole thing and
Yeah.
learning and knowing you were doing what you needed to do to thrive?
All right, so a couple things from a technical perspective. The good news is that I had a finance and operations job for a single business unit. So a lot of the terminology, accounting, finance, the execution of that stuff, the systems, I at least was somewhat familiar with. So it's
Mhm.
not like I was going into brand new stuff. Whereas in the financial planning and analysis job, the job before, it's like all brand new. This was somewhat more familiar. I'm back in the business. I'm comfortable in either spot, corporate or the business. And so I was feeling okay with that. What really, really helped, and I would say even for the listeners, they're thinking about, you got executives in roles and you're trying to figure out how do we make sure this thing goes well. For the first time, I was the person, I guess, the protagonist in what we call a leader in transition process. So it's a formal process. Prior to that, I had had a chance to be one of the people in the room because
Mhm.
my boss was transitioning out and I was getting a new boss. And we did a formal leader in transition for them. This time it was for me. So this formal leader in transition process works like this. The team, my direct reports, they have strong opinions, and I got views on how I want to run this thing. So what leader in transition does is it pairs HR and or communications to professionals who know right how this stuff ought to work. They go and they spend time listening to the team, my direct reports, and the direct reports offered them insight into what was working, what they liked about the predecessor, what they absolutely did not want to change, what they wanted to see more of, less of, et cetera, et cetera. And they did that independently of me. So I'm not in the room and you do that face, but it's all good. That's
Okay,
that's a good
okay,
thing. So then what happens is the HR professional and the communications professional then bring that back to me anonymized. So I don't get names. I don't get to
okay.
know who said what, which is very important to the process. The whole process breaks down if you want to get names and specific. No, don't do it that way. Anonymous feedback is all you need. So the feedback was presented to me and it's like, oh, okay. Much of that stuff already aligned with what my predecessor had told me the
Mhm.
people wanted and what they didn't want. Some of it though was different and new. But what that did for me, Aaron, is that it gave me direction. Okay, now I see what's important to them and I can try to make those things happen. That leader in transition process, the next part of it, sorry, the last part of it, is then when I come back into the room with my direct reports, I say, hey, here's the feedback that I've received. So I'll put like bullet one. You guys enjoy playing, having a good time. You like having fun, which was one of their things. And so I would write down ways that I think we can have a good time and have fun. So one of the things that they used to like to do was go to wineries. Again, if this were headquarters, this ain't happening.
Yeah.
Okay. This is
Plus, you're in
but
California, you gotta
but
go to a
in the
winery.
Bay,
Yeah.
things are different. We did all kinds of stuff over the 2.5, 3 years I was there. We went to Great America one time. We had a development day. We did some stuff at Levi Stadium, the San Francisco place. I mean, we went to a place across the bay. I mean, we did all kinds of stuff, and I told them about some of the ideas that I had that I thought would be fun. And that's how the process works. And I just go step by step through each of their concerns or the things they want. And then I just ask them, okay, what did I miss? Break this down for me. What else would you like to hear and see? And I think what that process did more than anything else is to help me understand where they're coming from. Number two, they felt heard.
Mhm.
And when people feel like you listen, it goes a really, really long way. And so I think that built some level of trust, not all the way, but that was something that helped.
Yeah, you made it foolproof too. I mean, you didn't your idea of fun could be different for them, like, right? Like, you
Right.
never would have thought of wineries maybe because that's not what we do here in Dallas, right? Like, it's different. So I love that you just made
Yeah.
it foolproof. Like, here's where I am. Where's the delta, right?
Yes. Yes.
What any regrets on this?
Regrets on the fun stuff?
No, of course, there's never regrets on fun. Well, there could be regrets on fun, but any regrets on the taking the role?
Okay, so I have a regret, and I wanna come back to some of the other stuff that I felt like helped me have success, but I do
Mhm.
wanna talk about a regret. I'm glad you asked me that. My biggest single regret is not investing more time upfront early with my second boss, and really my primary boss, the most important boss. Keep in mind I had 2.
Who was the second boss? The
Yeah.
second boss was
So I had the
the
corporate controller,
okay,
finance boss, and then I had the general manager, the senior VP running the business.
got it.
So I'm their right hand. and I'm their eyes and ears. And the benefit is that I was able to bring to him all that I had learned at the top. So even though technically he reported to the CEO, I probably talked more to the CEO than he did. I got to hear and feel what they really care about, strategic
Mhm.
decisions, all this kind of stuff. Even, yeah, I got to be in the room for a lot of things. I'll just put it that way. Okay. And so I could have leveraged that maybe better or differently as a way for us to get to know each other. Technically, we had worked together a little bit like years ago, like 2008, 2009, through some customer escalation stuff. He kind of got involved, but we didn't know each other.
Yeah.
And he didn't pick me to be his guy. And, you know, as a senior leader myself, I know what that's like. And what happened is that, he wasn't the easiest person for me to
Mhm.
kind of understand, get to know culturally. We very different people,
Okay.
but also age and stage. His predecessor, same age as him, kids out the house, so they could do stuff together on the weekend. Like it was a different relationship. And I had way less experience. And if I were in his shoes, yeah, I probably wouldn't want me for that either. You know what I mean? So I didn't get it then. I completely get that now. But I would have just taken more time to invest in that relationship differently. Now we eventually got, I would say, to a good place, definitely a place of respect, mutual respect, and some level of good trust. But when the general manager and head of finance and operations relationship is really tight, as mine been in prior roles, and frankly, every boss I had had before that, I didn't have to really work hard to sort of
Yeah.
win them over. This boss was just different, where I sort of needed to sort of win them over. Every other boss I had up to that point, I mean, my product was tight, right? So I made their life easier. So I don't think that was a struggle. I got stuff done, right? In this job, I kind of started, you have two kind of teachers.
Yeah.
My son is in the class right now where across the board at his school, when it comes to having your school stuff ready, you gotta have your backpack, you gotta have your laptop charged, fully charged. You gotta have your pen and your paper and all this kind of stuff, right? And so every kid starts with 100. And you lose 5 points every time you show up to that class and you're not prepared, your laptop's not fully charged, whatever. -5 deduction, now you're at a 95, right? You start with 100. That's actually the way that I live and work. So everybody with me has immediate street cred. Like nobody starts at 0. My boss, he more of a start at 0 kind of a person.
Yeah.
You gotta work your way up. That dynamic was challenging. So what I regret is that I didn't work harder at putting more energy into that. And there were all kinds of reasons why it was different for me versus my peers. There's an experience gap. There's a even location gap. It's going to sound so minor, but I'll share this for the listener because you might be in a location situation that could be impacting your business and you don't realize it. So here's the way our setup was. He had an office downstairs and I had an office upstairs on the second floor. Every single one of my peers had a co-location situation, which is what I had after this job when I moved to Dallas, is that you have the head of HR for that business, the head of communications, the general manager running the business, and the head of finance and operations co-located. Those 4 people all right there in the same suite. So guess what? I can see their movements coming in and out. I know when they're out of a meeting and in a meeting, and I just walk over, knock on the door. Hey, you got a second? That sounds so silly and so simple, but it's so much more work to pick up the phone. I gotta call his assistant. I gotta text him, or he gotta text me, or walk up the stairs. Who wants to walk up the stairs? Nobody, right? I mean,
Exactly.
these are just things that were barriers that I regret maybe not being more vocal about and attacking more directly. I've got clarity now that I didn't have then, and I was so junior. I didn't know what I could kind of like fight for. I didn't realize maybe all the power I had. So all that was a regret.
So I might be jumping ahead to the next episode. How did that relationship end up?
We ended in a good place,
Good.
like respectful. We were even for offsites. I helped them plan the agenda. Right, we got to that place pretty early on after about a year or so. By nature, I had to take on a significant level, even above what we've already talked about, more responsibility because he was going through some personal challenges, which I won't get into. Those are confidential. but there were some challenges that kept him from being as present as one normally would be. Because of that, I had to take on more stuff, and so we ended up driving. We would go to San Francisco sometimes for our offsites, and so we would drive together, right? Sometimes we went to Los Gatos, if you're familiar with the area, right?
Mhm.
And we would drive together or down even further south, like Monterey. So I would say it was a good relationship, respectful relationship, but it wasn't as tight as it could have been. And again, part of that's on me. Maybe part of that's on him. Maybe part of that's on the company for putting this new dude in this role. But that's part of life. And for me, hey, you just learn from it.
Yeah, it's a good lesson.
Yeah.
So overall,
Yeah.
looking back on this,
Yeah.
successful leap, uh, and then a why or why not.
Yeah, I feel like it was. I feel like it was. I can give you a very concrete representation of that. So the way our company works is we're a very conservative company, promote from within, even though we're a technology company. So tech technically very, very innovative. But on a lot of other ways, we operate more like an old industrial type of a company. And so what they do is that they give you this job, but they don't typically, I'm trying to think, have there been any exceptions? They don't give you the vice president title right away. So even
Mhm.
though I've packed up my family, moved everybody over here, there's no real assurance. By the way, in year one, even though I got a quote unquote promotion, my net pay was about the same, if not a little less than what it
'Cause
was
of the
in
move.
the year prior. Even with the relocation package and everything
Yeah.
else, like it was a faith thing to kind of take this leap. It really was. But back to your question, after about 6 months in a row, maybe 5 months in a row, something like that, I was given the vice president title.
Okay.
That won't come if they thought you're doing a lousy job or if they don't have confidence in you, if they're, ready to ship you back to Dallas or fire you, whatever. And, with the vice president title comes some additional rewards and financial rewards, which were far greater than I thought was even possible.
That's awesome.
And it was just what we needed from a family perspective too to feel better about our situation. I mean, milk even. I mean, they charge so
Gas.
much gas prices. I mean, you talk about your bag. If I remember the first time I went to a grocery store, they bagged the groceries, it's like 3 bags, and the price was something different. I'm like, I just got like some tomatoes. And they were like, yeah, it's 30 cents for each bag. What you mean it's 30 cents for a bag? Right? It's
Yeah.
just that kinda stuff. So, anyway, overall, yeah, I would say it was a successful leap because, if nothing else, that sign. But also, I think over time, I gained more confidence. The team clearly responded to me. The organization responded to me. Attrition, which is gonna happen this way, when you have an acquisition. At the time, I think my predecessor inherited like 120 people. And of course, there was attrition almost every month, right? People leaving, deciding to opt out. It makes sense, right?
Mm.
Plus, we were just too fat. So you had to trim some. And in those first 60 days, I lost two people. One was a top performer. Over the next 2 years, 24 months, I lost zero
Wow.
top performers and very few, if any, unwanted attrition. So there were a couple people that left, but by and large, we kept the team intact. And my direct reports, none of them left. So that was something that I felt like demonstrated that we had a good thing going.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, what are some of the big takeaways that looking back on this role that I mean, obviously it was, learning from a fire hose, right?
Yeah.
But it's like looking back on this, it seems like it really was a huge growing opportunity for
Oh,
you.
no question. No question. Like I said, it's the most dynamic job I've ever gotten into. A couple things that really, really help. One, have a circle of advisors. I had a circle of advisors, a legitimate group of people who I could go to. One was you might laugh at this, but they were a longtime postal manager. They worked at the post office for like 35, 40 years, but they were a supervisor for almost all those years.
Wow.
There's a ton of wisdom and knowledge you get from somebody in your inner circle who's managed lots and lots of people for a long time. That was one of the people. Another person was a vice president at a company here in Dallas, big company, everybody would know the name. Another was a CFO. There were a few people like that in my life. One, my financial advisor was one, my wife, obviously. So being able to leverage those people for input, for advice on just how to work through both the personal side as well as the professional side. That was really helpful. The human engagement side of this thing, we just cannot underestimate. I mean, there's a ton of blocking and tackling customers and delivery and products that have a bad manufacturing flow and a challenging relationship with manufacturing
Mhm.
because we own these sites and, how come National does it this way? I'm like, "Oh, we're TI, we're trying," you had all that, but what I would just say is that the human engagement, one, again, in September, which was pretty early on within the first 90 days, it was my mission to get our team bonded. So we took a trip to Malaysia. That's where our assembly and test facility was located, our only assembly and test facility. And I thought that would be a great way, one, for me to get on the ground and understand what the issues are, right? Because there
Mhm.
were all kind of complaints and noise about why this factory is no good and this and that. And I wanted to just get on the ground and hear, right? Meet the people, see what's going on. So that was big from that perspective. Second thing is that our team, when you travel together, it's just special. It's just different. You get to know people
Yeah.
outside of the formality of work. And I don't know how expensive that trip was, on average back then, we were, believe it or not, we were traveling in coach. As crazy as that may sound, right? It's
Mhm.
23 hours door to door to get, on the ground in Kuala Lumpur, but probably was less than $20,000 or around 20,000 bucks, fully worth it because the level of trust, camaraderie, jokes that we could take back with us. There was this one lady who had an issue with the food no matter where we went. So that was an ongoing thing that traveled with us for as long as we were in that role. That was a big human engagement. The other thing was I did these small group finance and operations lunches. So that would be me and then let's say 6 to 8, mostly individual contributors or first line managers. They were part of my organization, and it's my way to get to know them. So I didn't have an agenda. I didn't want to ask them about their metrics. We would just go to some nice local place for lunch, and they would feel again taken care of, heard. I just sit around and just talk to them. Hey, what's
Mhm.
going on in your life? What's going on in the business? What challenges do you have? Any problems I can solve? And again, I think the people felt heard. I did all that stuff in that first 90-day period. One of the last things I'll say is that we did this another travel event. This was in November, very early November. There was going to be this big meeting, this 2 or 3 day meeting in Dallas, and we're back in Dallas. And I decided, let me take advantage of those evenings. So we did like a Dave and Buster's night. We did this sip and paint or paint and sip, whatever it's
Mhm.
called,
Yep.
and you get to see the competitiveness of people,
Yeah.
the creativity of people, and once again, what do you have? Stories that developed. And that actual painting that I made, which I'm horrible. I'm no good at
Yeah.
drawing. That's not my gift. I still have it. When I record stuff behind me at the house, you'll see that painting. That's how much it means to me, and it meant
That's
a
cool.
lot to the people. They still would hang theirs up, right, on their cubicle and in their wall in their office. So I think the human engagement was really big. Having a strong circle of advisors was really, really big. And if I can just maybe add on, I would just say we were 4 business units. So I'm at the top. There's 4 business units. Pretty early in my tenure, we decided we needed to have 6 business units. So once again, another complexity. We took a pretty big business and split it in 2. One of the key important decisions is that I said, "Hey, the leader who has that one single business is gonna be finance and operations leader for the 2. That's gonna stretch her, but I think she's capable." That was a important decision, and I think it proved to be the right decision because I don't know that anybody else was built like that on the team, and she did a great job with it, built great relationships with her VPs, etcetera. The other business unit that we needed to create, a high voltage business, everyone in the semiconductor industry knows there's low voltage and medium voltage and high voltage. We hadn't done anything really in the high voltage space, so it's a new space, and we decided to create a startup called a
Oof.
Thrust. Gallium nitride was the name of the development, and I needed an F&O leader for that, a finance and operations leader for that. And I call that my first round draft pick because that's my opportunity for the first time to pick a person that I want on my team. And the person I picked was absolutely the right person. We had worked together. They could be my eyes and ears. This was going to be based in Dallas. So I had people in Tucson and Dallas and Malaysia and Santa Clara and Scotland and all over. But this person could be my eyes and ears in Dallas. And they were very relational and also very technically strong. So those were some of those early important decisions that were critical to having success in the role. That's what I felt helped it be a positive leap. Man, was I completely successful at everything? No. I told you about that regret. Maybe the other regret I have, like I said, I didn't understand my power. I really should have been more forceful on having an administrative assistant who could almost be full-time to me, but because that person supported the general manager and me, what
Oh,
do, right? You sort of default. But if you think about it, I took 20 trips on average every year, 20 trips, 4 or 5 of them international, the rest of Dallas. So, um, that's a lot of stuff to book, plus all the meetings and the calendar whole
yeah, you
issues,
needed a full admin, yeah.
and I didn't understand enough. I allowed other people to sort of make decisions for me, which hurt my productivity, and it had a cascade effect at home. And I should have been more firm on that, but you think, "Oh, I'm a finance guy. I can't look like I'm spending money and, having an assistant dedicated to me. None of my other peers had that." Yeah, but they also don't have any of the complexities that I'm dealing with over here.
Right.
But that's hard to justify. It's so hard to justify when you're remote site.
Well, just the on-site meeting planning, like, you need an admin just for that. Yeah.
And the one I had at that time, again, was more or less dedicated. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what she was told and how things were communicated. It was this odd thing. And I know my peers were not getting the level of support that I was getting. And I was coming off having someone who was great before that. And I'm not saying this person was bad. I just know that they felt like,
You
uh,
weren't their person, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was I went through 4 assistants in 2.5 years, and it was just a mess. It killed my productivity, and I could never seemingly convince myself to like push really hard and explain my situations to the executives. So, man, I made some bumps. I definitely stumbled. Was it a good leap? Yes. At the same time, woof, it was exhausting, dynamic, and a really important leap in my development and in my growth.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I love it. It's a good story.
Yeah.
I'm glad it worked out.
Yes, yes,
It was a
yes.
bumpy. All right. So, with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. We obviously still have more to cover at some point, sometime, because you're still not in this role. So,
That's right.
something else has happened. But until then, thank you so much. This is a great story. I think it's going to help a lot of people because I think it's the fear of making a leap because of the unknown
Mhm.
when the unknown is the whole purpose of the leap, right? Like,
Yeah.
you just don't know it. And to,
I for sure didn't know,
yeah,
and I wonder would I have made a different decision
had you known.
had I known.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Ignorance is bliss in this case, in many cases, but especially in this case. So thank you.
yeah,
So till next time, we definitely want to talk about what happened later, but this was a great, lots of learning experience.
awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you got value from this podcast, don't keep it a secret. Subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone you know. Until next time, remember, our world is starving for bona fide leaders. Take your leadership to the next level by applying at least one thing you heard today.